I am so excited to talk about the new character designs for Warcrow. I think what Corvus Belli is doing here is much different than what they are doing in Infinity. Let's get into it today. Roll that intro. Welcome to Corner Case. You're in the hobby corner. I'm your host, your art director, and your best friend, Deck. I have been holding off on talking about this topic for a few weeks now, but Corvus Belli has released the 5th episode of Whispers of Lindworm, link in description below, and they have also, along with it, teased the 3rd character design for the game. So I feel comfortable sharing my thoughts now. First, the dwarf of Mount Haven, Soka, the sinister Yaldabaoth marked models, and Captain Legolas Sparrow himself, Dalach. First thing right off the bat that I think you can see when you compare these 3 models side by side is that there is a very big difference in the design language of each faction, and they're really recognizable from one another. I've said on the channel before that I think the designs in Infinity between factions are pretty samey. I think that's coming from a couple things. While it is a sci-fi setting, I believe that it's intended to feel more grounded and real, and as a result, I think the differences are really more nuanced, at least within the human sphere, between each faction. Once you factor in that the factions all kind of buy and sell tech from each other, then you really end up with a formula that's basically making all the models look pretty samey. While we're getting into it, I want to do a quick vocab lesson. For those of you already trained in design, please bear with me. For those of you who are not, you might enjoy this. So when we talk about aesthetics, visual aesthetics mostly, we use the vocabulary first, second, and third read to describe the experience of discovery of the design, part of the design that is recognizable at a certain distance. If we take a car, for example, a first read would be like the silhouette 10 to 20 feet away. A second read might be the details that you notice from 3 to 6 feet away. And a third read might be the details you notice up close, like the grill, the small details. Another way to say first, second, and third read is the forest, the trees, and the leaves. And so we'll be using this language as we talk about the design elements of the character designs. So when I say that models in the Infinity range can tend to look pretty samey, what I'm saying more technically is that I think the differences happen at the third read details rather than at the first read silhouette. I think the new models are addressing that, but especially a lot of the old models, I think from a first read can tend to look pretty samey. Now, when we look at these new Warcrow designs, I think that there's a lot of differences at the first read. Now, some of that is obviously coming from the fact that dwarves are short, and this Yaldabaoth has antlers, so those are really big differences in silhouette. But even if we look at the big shape designs, there are pretty unique differences as well. So let's take a look at it a little bit deeper. Let's start with the Mount Haven dwarf Soka. When you look at Soka, her proportions and her shape language, she at a first read actually looks like a boulder. She's made up of these big blocky volumes, and she looks like she's faceted like a boulder. She has these diamond shapes on her. So you have these big diamond shapes on her armor. And even if you zoom in to a second read, you can see that her chainmail also is made up of these little diamond shapes. Usually that would be a third read detail, but I think the play with scale actually bumps up the visual priority of that mail, actually. Really big diamond motif going on with Soka so far. Now let's contrast the boulder that is Soka with the next model that was teased, which is the Yaldabaoth marked. So right away, you can see that the Yaldabaoth is made up of these long pointy shapes. These long pointy shapes really make up the first read already. So that's a big shape motif. But if we zoom in to the second read, I think the second read actually carries a lot of storytelling. So even before Corvus Belli mentions that the Yaldabaoth do body modifications, you can already tell that a big theme of the faction visually is composites. When you look at the skirt from the back, it's made up of these big jagged shapes composited together. Even the clothing, the cloaks are kind of made of these spaghetti noodles. So it's a lot of piecing things together, and you can tell that from the second read. And that's a big contrast from Soka, who was uniformly a boulder. Lastly, it even has that pile of bells, and I think that's something different that you don't really see much in Infinity, but you see here in this fantasy setting. I see it sometimes in 40K as well, where you kind of have these ritual objects, for lack of a better word. So, you can kind of tell that this is more of a culty, magical, or religious type of faction because they wear their symbol, the bell, quite gratuitously. So I think that's pretty cool. You don't really get as much opportunity for that maybe in sci-fi. And last, I really struggled with this one, but Captain Legolas Sparrow, aka Dalach, his first read here, the first thing I'm seeing from his silhouette is asymmetry. And when I see that this character is kind of designed to be in motion. I can't boil down Dalach shape language as succinctly as I was able to for the last two models. And I think it's because this design's primary theme is actually contrast. So there's a contrast between the organic leaves and organic bow, contrast the orderly and artificial armor and swords. The softness of the cape contrast the sharpness of the swords. So there's a lot of contrast happening, and it really looks like the silhouette is supposed to be in motion. So I think that would actually be like a cool thing I want to see in the model range. You know, as you start to see more of the Mount Haven dwarves come out, are they mostly in static poses to communicate that they're really grounded and defensive? And are the elves mostly being depicted as being in motion? I didn't mean to do this, but as a quick aside, my character, Toozer, in my City of Mist game, I have a bit of a brand guideline for Toozer, and because he is a speedster like Hermes or the Flash, I have a rule for his character design where he is never allowed to be depicted with both feet on the floor. So I actually wonder if, as we see more of the Warcrow elves, you know, will they employ a similar idea where the elves are mostly in motion, and maybe only some of them, you know, maybe the important ones like the lieutenants or commanders, maybe they're both feet on the floor, but maybe most of these other elves are actually only ever depicted in motion. That could be pretty cool, and cool collaboration between the sculpting and character design language. So that's what I think about the shapes. We don't even talk about color, just the shapes between each faction and the potential design. And the next topic I want to discuss, we won't go into like a big deep dive of the way fantasy tropes have been designed over the years, but we will be using the Lord of the Rings movies, the Peter Jackson genre-defining designs as a baseline here. I want to talk about how these Warcrow designs build on what I think is existing in terms of dwarf and elf tropes. Fantasy is a pretty wide genre. In order to create your own fantasy IP, there's an absolute red ocean of stuff you have to overcome. So if we use Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies as a baseline, do these designs break away from the norms? The skinny answer, I think it does pretty well, while still maintaining familiarity. And the way we're going to talk about this, someone once told me this, and I could never unsee it, is a lot of the dwarven imagery is built off of like an Art Deco kind of style. So that's like a visual art style. It's most prominent or memorable from architecture, like the Empire State Building. The Great Gatsby movie used this style a lot. It's really geometric, and it has a lot of straight lines, a lot of angles, and a lot of elven culture and arts and artifacts are based on like an Art Nouveau kind of style. And that's kind of like the Paris Metro or Alphonse Mucha. If you're a nerd, you probably knew Alphonse Mucha before you knew Alphonse Mucha was his name. And if you knew his name, you probably knew that before you knew it was called Art Nouveau. It's a really popular style. I love it when Art Nouveau is just executed non sequitur. For example, one of my favorite Witchblade covers, I'm revealing too much about myself here. When you consider that those are kind of what I would consider the Peter Jackson baseline, Sokka and Darach do a pretty good job of breaking away from that. Just enough where they're still memorable. They still communicate some of the same things. You know, the hardiness of a dwarf. You know, Sokka looks like a boulder. But instead of hearkening to the Art Deco, more so, Sokka is really leaning into the faceted diamond kind of look. I think that shape design is a really cool twist or yes and to the status quo. And I think Darach does a pretty interesting job with the proportions, the asymmetry, and actual just straight up integration of leaves. It's a little bit more like Radagast had a baby with Legolas. Anyway, let us know what you think about the character designs in the comments below. We are so excited for Warcrow. Please like and subscribe. We are always desperate. See you next time. Join the Discord, maybe the Patreon. We love you.
I am ready to subscribe again.